Hello, I'm Get the Cans, and I've been thinking a lot about fair game. If you don't already know, the so-called Church of Scientology practices what is called fair game. Essentially, is where they find the people that they are being, criticized by, anyone that disagrees with them, or for any reason at all, and basically they track them down, get their personal information, and use absolutely everything that they know about them to destroy that other person. I've known of people who have lost their jobs, and there's been recorded incidents where people have simply turned up missing. Some people have mysteriously committed suicide. It's very strange when all these things just kind of happen as soon as the Church of Scientology knows who you are. It's absolutely disgusting to think that any of this stuff could even happen, but, they seem to be treating the world like it's some kind of playground where it's not really a big deal if they happen to squash a few ants, even if they just happen to forget the fact that they are ants themselves in the big scheme of things. We all live in a society, and when we don't support each other and we attack each other, basically we start acting more like viruses than human beings, going and using resources within communities and using those resources to create more destruction and destroying everything within that community, So when people go out of their way to criticize or even just simply to offhand disagree with any of their so-called policies or rules, even if they're outside of Scientology, even if they have absolutely nothing to do with the church whatsoever, and just happen to disagree with them in any way, and happen to tell somebody else about what they think, well, then they're automatically declared what is called a suppressive person, an SP. This suppressive person is to be basically attacked, sued, lied to, tricked, or destroyed. One of the popular tactics that they like to use during fair game is basically that they take a person and they sue them over and over and over again in court. And even if they don't win, the fact is it costs a person an arm and a leg every time they have to hire a new lawyer. And since Scientology gets to write off a lot of things, and they get a lot, or had, at the time that they had started all this stuff, had a lot of money, they basically drilled the person into the ground financially and then used other tactics to permanently shut them up. It's absolutely disgusting. So some of the tactics that they would use against their own members is absolutely horrific, and essentially turning them from what used to be an innocent victim in the Scientology pyramid scheme who didn't really know what was going on to a person who's essentially trapped there because they have no choice but to stay in there because of financial blackmail, because of other blackmail, because they're threatening to hurt people that they care about and they don't want them to get hurt. It's absolutely disgusting, but it happens. Anyways, fair game of today has been getting a lot easier to deal with because of all the publicity that the so-called Church of Scientology's had to deal with. One of the things that they like to do, basically, is just hand you a letter that states that you should stop doing all illegal activities, blah, 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 blah. It holds absolutely no water, and it means absolutely nothing. But it does let the person know that they are essentially on the radar of the COS. Not a whole lot has been happening to some of the critics today, but unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily mean nothing will ever happen. With the publicity that the Church of Scientology has been getting, they've been unable, or at least would be stupid for them to do this, to do exactly what they're being accused of. When somebody goes out of their way saying that they harass people, saying that the so-called Church of Scientology, when they harass people, when they blackmail them and do all these horrible things and stuff like that, you can't just go and do these mass attacks because they will come back on you. Before all of this protesting happened, people basically, there was only a select few people that even knew what was really going on, at least in terms of spreading the information around, because the COS was very good at keeping it under wraps. When one person, or even 10 people, decided to start speaking out, essentially they were silenced. Nobody knew what was going on. It was just like invisible attackers. They just come out of nowhere and they disappear, and there's absolutely no link to what was the, immaculate image of the so-called Church of Scientology. The perfect image that they portray today is marred by the fact that there's a lot of facts about what they actually do out on the internet, as well as on the pamphlets and the other cards and other things like that that the anonymous members and other critics hand out. What basically I'm trying to say is that it isn't necessarily true that just because you're safe now that you will ever really be permanently safe. It would be more of a safe bet to figure that they would be waiting for the perfect moment, essentially when the hype is worn down. And I wouldn't necessarily say that the hype will wear down too soon, but eventually, when people stop, when the large majority of people stop largely investigating what is going on with the COS out of curiosity, that the COS will think that they are sufficiently safe that they can begin to attack their critics, which is absolutely wrong, and as soon as they do that, then essentially what exactly would have happened if they had done it before will happen, and they'll basically use a machine gun and point it at their foot and give them a mass amount of foot bullets. Repeat until the world supply of bullets is completely used up, as the so-called saying goes. But anyways, that's essentially what I'm trying to say. A long time ago, it was really dangerous to be fair-gamed, and it isn't any more different than today. The only difference, basically, is that you're safe for now because of the publicity that the so-called Church of Scientology is getting. But once once that publicity is all gone, then eventually, essentially you're screwed. Maybe not completely screwed, maybe not totally screwed. But I've heard of people that have lost their jobs. I've heard of people that have lost friends. I've heard of people that basically can't even sleep at night anymore. People's pets being killed. Strange coincidences that just happen to happen, at the exact same time as them being fair-gamed by the so-called Church of Scientology. Yeah, it's really, really weird when all that stuff happens. Whatever. I'm going to go put my tinfoil hat on later. Anyways, final words. Just because the axe hasn't quite fallen down doesn't mean it isn't coming at all. It takes a little time, but eventually, off with your head.